camera earlier, but it reverted to the default position, which is very annoying because I spent time fixing it. So it's going to take a little time for me to fix it again. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
But the mic is live right now, so.
Oh, so I better be careful. Good evening. So that it'll look like,
There's a 45-second delay between when we adjust the camera and it shows up there, so it takes a little while to get better, get better.
are they also getting the screen?
Yes.
Good, great. Yeah, because yesterday they didn't. People were upset. Thank you. You have no idea how much cred I just earned thanks to you. Because my son is a tech wizard, you know. He's 30. And I get the eye roll every time I ask for help. And he will know that. So I'm going to come home.
I'm glad to do it.
I mean, boy, my cred just went.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking a moment away from your American elections to talk about another very important election that affects us as Jews, as Americans, and all across the world. First, we'd like to welcome everyone here in the sanctuary and everyone joining us on our live stream. Award-winning journalist, academic, and lecturer Eetta Prince-Gibson was previously editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report and is the Israeli editor for Moment magazine. She's a regular contributor to Haaretz, The Forward, Hadassah Magazine, and other Israeli and international publications, and a frequent commentator for domestic and international radio and TV. Her work focuses on Jerusalem, Israeli-Arab relations, gender and civil society, as well as political analyses. She's won numerous awards and reported from all over the world. She taught political science and gender studies at Hebrew University and at Brandeis University, and received academic awards from both of these universities in recognition of her original research and excellence in teaching. We are honored to have her on our American tour. There are t-shirts available in the lobby, sharing with us this evening. Welcome, Eetta. Thank you. Just make sure
Thank
to
you
use
very
the
much, Rabbi. Okay. Thank you all for coming and for listening. And I thank you for that kind introduction. I want to say that I'm going to be presenting what I hope will be some analysis, some objective analysis of what happened, but also my opinion and my perception. And I'll talk a little bit about that. What I hope most of all is it'll lead us to a thoughtful discussion on the challenges that Israel faces and that the American Jewish community face and that we face together. So as you all know, and that's the reason I'm here, Israel voted last week And unlike you, it takes us several days to get the results. So these are fairly solid, but they were not confirmed until a few days ago. In many ways, these elections on last week were truly a celebration of democracy. It was in Jerusalem, it was a great day, the weather was great, and the sun was out. And in my neighborhood, which is a mixed neighborhood of Arabs and Jews in southern Jerusalem, elections is a party, and don't forget, we voted so often, we all get, it's a chance to see each other. People actually brought coffee and cake to the voting booth so that we could sit and hang out. It's a national holiday, voting day. So we hang out. Jews and Arabs were voting, and we're all high-fiving. And we made lots of jokes. These jokes have been running for quite some time now. I thought you might enjoy them, about how often we vote in Israel. This was our 5th election in 3.5 years. And we repeated these jokes so often that we actually think they're funny. I hope you do too, that in Israel, this is a play on words. A government in Israel is like a Kia. You elect, which also means you choose, and you don't know how to put it together. Of course, Israelis like Groundhog Day, the movie too. So here's Bill Murray saying, well, it's election day again. And Seinfeld can't do it without the soup Nazi. And the Hebrew says, politicians, there's no more elections for you. Come back in 4 years. And these are some of the scenes I took from my neighborhood, just except for this one in the corner, which shows you that we pretty much vote the same way we did in 1948. And it was an election day that went without almost any interruptions or incidents, with a voter turnout across most sectors of 71%, which is certainly a welcome sign that, yeah, I just didn't want it. No, thank you. Which is a sign that Israeli citizens remain engaged in politics and want to say in determining the direction of the country, despite the frequency of elections. There was a lot of concern about a low turnout across the board, and 71% is quite high. It's 71% mostly in the Jewish community. The Arab community was about 55%. Also quite high for Western democracies, although low within the context of Israel. A celebration of democracy in some ways, but not everybody is celebrating, and I'm not celebrating. I'm very, very concerned, and I'm even frightened about the future of Israeli democracy. Israel is a very, very fractured and divided society. And in a divided society, I don't think anybody can stay neutral, because whether you are aware of it or not, your vote goes one way or the other. And even if I believed as a journalist and as a citizen that neutrality is possible or desirable, I don't think I could do it. And so the presentation I'm going to bring to you tonight is my views and my concerns as an Israeli Jew, as a Zionist, a feminist, the daughter of a modern Orthodox rabbi who grew up in the conservative movement, a committed Reform Jew in Israel, as the daughter of refugees. I'm going to talk about the values that I stand for, which I think are threatened by these elections. So what I'm going to do in this presentation, I will try to be fair, I will try to be analytic, but I'll share my concerns and the fact that I'm not celebrating. And yet, having said that, I want to convey to you a sense of determination and belief that despite all the, the anxiety and the calls of how this is awful, and many of you saw, I'm sure, the Tom Friedman piece in the New York Times, history isn't over. Even if I felt that way on Wednesday morning or Tuesday night when I saw the results at the airport. We voted and then left to come here with a strong feeling of it's all over. It isn't. It is, history isn't linear, and it isn't over. And I believe the arc of history is positive, ultimately, and that's where we all fit in. Because I believe that concerned Jews like you in the American and Jewish world community together, we can still make Israel the country you believe in, and I believe in. If we don't, as it is right now, the Israel you're going to come to visit may be very, very different. You can forget under this government about the Kotel Agreement of the egalitarian plaza. You can forget about any kind of power sharing or recognition of the Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist, or more indigenous Israeli liberal movements. You can worry and possibly seriously consider the threat to NGOs, non-governmental organizations doing civil society work. Those of you with Palestinian friends who are citizens of Israel, I don't know to what extent their equality will be legally challenged. I do know that their feeling is already challenged. So I'm going to tell you how the system works, what are the takeaways from the elections, what I'm concerned about, and what you can do. So first of all, how do we vote? Well, you might be interested knowing that we actually do vote by paper. It's the first thing, not particularly theoretically important, but we put little pieces of paper in envelopes and they are hand counted, which is why it sometimes takes days till we know the results. What you need to know to understand, the first thing you need to know to understand Israeli politics is the magic number 61. That's the famous number. Because of the structure of the government. The structure of the government is, this is a classic structure of a coalition parliamentary government. The people are the electorate who elect the Knesset, which then elects for 7 years a president who is a figurehead. Not like the King of England, but in the sense of a figurehead. And the government, which is the executive part of the executive branch, and the prime minister, who heads the executive branch. The elections are nationwide and they are proportional. This means that voters cast their votes for a party, not a person. The percentage of votes that a party receives will translate into the number of seats that a party will take in the 120 seats in the Knesset, okay? So in theory, if a party received 50% of the votes, it would receive 60 seats, okay? Therefore, 61 becomes the magic number because that's the tip to majority. However, to be part of the Knesset and to prevent little tiny parties of 3 and sometimes even 1 member to get into the Knesset, each party must pass a threshold and garner at least 3.25% of the votes cast. And that mattered a lot in this election, as you will see. So as we said, what you get is something that looks pretty much like this, 120 seats, and they divide up according to how many seats each party got in the election. In the country's history, no single party ever won 61 seats. I mean, you may think 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We think 120 seats, 40 parties. I'm not kidding. 40 parties ran in this election. Usually about a dozen make it across the threshold. The only time that Israel, the most seats ever won in an Israeli election were by Golda Meir, who won 56 seats in 1969 as head of the Alignment Party. And then by 73, of course, well, in the elections following that one, she was out real quick. In the past elections, in 2021, there were 13 parties that made it in out of 39 parties that ran. In this election, 40 parties ran and 10 made it in. And you will get something like this slide that you see. Because the government requires the Knesset to confirm it in order to function, the government can propose something, but if a majority of these seats don't vote for that proposal, it won't happen. the prime minister, who's nominally or most of the time head of the largest party, will have to cobble together a coalition. And they will try to convince other parties to join them. A lot of what you hear at the beginning of the elections, for instance, is if we get in, we will go with. And that's how you start to see the blocs even before the election. But as you could understand, the permutations for the creation of a coalition government can be somewhat infinite. There are a lot of ways to add up to 61. And small parties become kingmakers. They enjoy disproportionate power. And that leads to weeks of negotiations, horse trading, backroom deals, power sharing promises that everybody knows are not going to be kept. In most cases, the ultimate agreements are by law made public. So we will know when the coalition is brought to the Knesset for confirmation, which includes confirmation of the prime minister, which has to be within the next few weeks, but it could run to the very end. We will know what the agreements were, and that's what you're seeing now. Okay, which is why you're hearing, is so-and-so going to be Minister of Education, is so-and-so going to be Minister of Internal Security, and each party brings its demands, and let the horse trading begin. How did we get into elections this time? Well, 61 is the necessary requirement, but it's not the sufficient requirement, because a coalition of 61 is inherently unstable. Any one member of Knesset can bolt. They can try to blackmail. They can do anything they want. And once that happens, you're down to 60, can't pass a budget, can't do anything, the government will eventually fall. Over the years, Netanyahu, whom I'm going to call, unfortunately, Bibi, because that's what we all call him, that is his nickname, and everybody calls him that, has not been able to form a stable coalition. So each time he propelled the country into elections thinking he'd get a better deal the next time, and he used various legal ways to do that aren't terribly important right now. But each time he didn't get a better deal. He did not form a stable coalition. In 2021, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, whose party actually only had 6 seats out of the 120, Israeli politics, did do the arithmetic, and he added up to 61, put together a very diverse coalition. It was called the Coalition of Change, the change being not Netanyahu, that focused on supposedly largely consensual domestic issues, the pandemic, housing, the economy, and avoided the difficult ones, like the Palestinian conflict, state and religion, foreign relations. That didn't hold either, and ultimately the diversity of that coalition was so great that it simply imploded under the weight of its own diversity. And we had elections about. Again, what were the elections about? First, I'll tell you what they were not about. They were not about the peace process, inflation, Jerusalem, Iran, the climate crisis, degradation of the quality of public services, education, teachers had been on strike for quite some time, welfare, settler violence, Palestinian violence. No, we weren't talking about any of those. Initially, like the past 4, the elections focused primarily on whether or not Netanyahu, who is currently on trial, not about to be indicted, on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, should or should not be prime minister, which we in the foreign press love to say to Bibi or not to Bibi. We think that's very clever. And so what you see is this was a common cartoon, political cartoon. You might also notice, though, and I'll talk about this in a minute, that there's a certain cynicism here. The just Bibi is presenting, of course, Bibi as a king, and the faceless people are bowing down to him, while the just not Bibi, I think, reminds us of those moments of glory that we thought were going to be in the former Soviet Union when, you know, Lenin and those statues were toppled. So there's a certain cynicism about the voters of Bibi that I'll talk about a minute later. But as it became clear that the extreme right was ascendant, that became the focus of the elections. And these are the final results. This was at 7 o'clock p.m. on Thursday night, I believe. This is a final. I think there may be one or two movements since then, but we don't know. The Likud won 32 seats. These are seats, not percentage of the vote, okay? Yesh Atid is the second largest party, won 24. Religious Zionist, which is the extremist right-wing party that I will speak about extensively, is the third largest party in Israel right now. They are in the pro-Netanyahu bloc. They will be part of the coalition, and they will make demands. The National Unity Party, which actually in Hebrew translates as a little differently, the Regal Party, 12, Shas, ultra-Orthodox, 11, UTJ, United Torah Judaism, 7, Yisrael Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman, largely, it's not a Russian party, actually. The Russians aren't the only ones voting for it. Ra'am, Arab Party, Islamic Party, 5. Chadash Tal, Arab Party, 5. Labor, 4. Meretz, the left-wing party, did not make it in. Squeezed out by very few votes. And well, by the threshold that I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I do want to show you something here that won't show up on this slide, and it's very important. If you take into account the parties that didn't get in under the threshold, 48.92% of the country voted center-left. 48.36% voted right and religious. So what you're looking at is a very divided society. There's going to be strong opposition on the ground to anything on any side. In a way, without getting into the details, this is somewhat like the way the Electoral College in the United States is different than the popular vote. Okay, because votes didn't get in and all sorts of things, this does not necessarily reflect the electorate. It does reflect the percentages of voting for what parties. How did we get to this result, and what does it tell us? I'm going to give you several layers of explanations. First of all, there's simple political science explanations. Elections in countries that are in a paralyzing political tie, and you know, I've shown you that we are with close to 50% on either side, are not decided, those elections are not decided by ideology, vision, values, or identity. We all might like to think they are. But a good, solid analysis shows that they're decided by tactics, by campaigning tactics, even micro-tactics. And Netanyahu is an amazing politician. Whatever else I or anybody else thinks of him, he just won his 6th term as prime minister. You have to at least be a good campaigner to do that. However, he built a political strategy based on turning the political community into antagonistic tribes. He basically set half the country against half the country. He cut deals on the basis of those divisions, and that also worked. Another political science type answer is that 130,000 votes were lost to these, remember I told you 40 parties, like the Pirates Party. There really is a Pirates Party. I really tried to find out what it stands for, other than the fact that they like, I guess, dressing up as pirates. There are other really strange parties that run. So those votes never got counted. Also, the threshold. There is a lack of parties can agree to have leftover agreements. In other words, the votes that would have pushed me in can accrue to you, and that actually could have made a difference. Those votes were simply lost, but that helps to create the anomaly that I mentioned in terms of who actually voted. If you remember, Meretz came in just under the threshold. Okay? Another layer of explanation is to look at the world. You can't detach what's happening in Israel from the rest of the world. We know about Bolsonaro, who just was unelected, but it isn't, he was elected, he was kicked out, but it isn't over. We know about Viktor Orban in Hungary. We know about Duda in Poland, Meloni in Italy, and so on, Le Pen in France. And so if Israel is supposed to be a nation, we're supposed to be both a light unto the nations and a nation like any other nation, I guess we get to have our demagogues and reactionary populists too. There is a world trend, and we are part of it, as is, of course, the United States. And to a certain extent, these two layers of explanation are certainly true, but I want to offer you a more complex and a more specific to Israel analysis of what I believe happened. First of all, voter turnout. As I said, 71% of the people voted. 71% of the people aren't sick of it. That means, by the way, that we do have the highest average in the world of voting. We beat out Greece and Spain. And there were a lot of jokes about, no need to present your ID because the pieces of paper recognize you. And, in my community, in my neighborhood, usually the same people volunteer at the voting booth, and we bring them coffee too. And everybody's greeting everybody. We all know each other. Lots of jokes about we vote often, and we vote early and often. Although I don't know if Al Capone or Richard Daley said that. And we also, a lot of people complained. I know in my family we complained. My husband and I, for instance, were actually concerned about two parties that might not pass the threshold. So we agreed that one of us would vote for one and one of us would vote for the other. And we tossed a coin. But I didn't like the way the coin came out, and I voted earlier. So I got to do what I wanted, and he had to do the other one. But that's, joking aside, it's also very soulless. And again, very surprised at the voter turnout. The voter turnout tells us about the engagement. So we have to look at the parties' campaigns. People wanted to vote. What was offered to them? And here I want to be very critical of the center-left, to which I have told you I belong. We ran a campaign with almost no focus on the many achievements of the previous government, which was only in power for less than a year and a half, and still had quite a lot of achievements to its credit. The center-left ran what is popularly called, using the Yiddish term, in Hebrew using the Yiddish, a Gewalt campaign, which is a send me a Hail Mary pass campaign, or, God help us. I think you'd even like to know that Mansour Abbas from the Ram party, who was concerned that he wouldn't pass the threshold and only received 5, in Arabic used the Yiddish word and actually said, Hadin intikhabat Gewalt. So you heard Gewalt in a Palestinian Arabic accent, then you understand Israeli elections. But I think also the campaign was dismissive, not only of Bibi, but of his voters. We called them Bibyists, Bibiisms. Presented them as dumb automatrons who blindly support their leader. In the United States, this is a known phenomenon as well. And by the way, in sociology, some of the work I'm doing at Van Leer talks about this. In mainstream US sociology, this is called the Great Paradox. And why do people vote against their best interests, as though we, liberals, know better than everyone else what everyone else's best interests are? Of course, that's dismissive, it's insulting, and it ultimately pushes people into an identity camp. We can look at the rise of the right as another thing to consider here. How did Ben Gvir, who is that there be no doubt, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the head of one of the three constituents of the National Religious Zionist Party, is a follower of the teachings of Meir Kahane. He was convicted of incitement to terrorism. He is the one that some of you may have seen weeks before Rabin was assassinated, holding up the symbol of Rabin's car and saying, "We got to the car, we can get to Rabin," never proven that that was actually the symbol, that that was actually taken off the car. And I'm not saying that he colluded in Rabin's assassination, but I am saying that he was certainly part of an atmosphere that allowed it to happen. But they provided really clear, simple messages. In contrast to the unwieldy messages of the center-left, which are also often voiced in, terms of the universal language of human rights and individualism, and things that I don't want to minimize, but I'm not sure that they attended to all of the concerns of the people who were voting. Ben-Gvir presents a strain of Judaism that has a fierce belief in the need for strength as both a means and an end, and simply enough in and of itself. There's no loftier collective objective as far as people like Ben-Gvir are concerned than not individual freedom, not collective freedom, but the discourse of strength which Netanyahu fostered. And strength has to be demonstrated. This is provocation rather than ideology. And this was at a demonstration, this is Itamar Ben-Gvir, at a demonstration in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem a few weeks before the election, where both Israeli Jews, Palestinian citizens of Israel, Israeli Palestinians, and Israelis from East Jerusalem were demonstrating. Ben-Gvir felt, or said he felt, threatened. He pulled a gun. I don't know if you can see it, but he pulled a gun. And there's a police officer there saying, put it away. This is the demonstration of strength. He played very strongly on the great fears that are still there in Israeli society, coming from the Second Intifada, and coming from the riots in May 2021, about a year and a half ago, in mixed cities, when it was scary. The riots, true, there were Jews rioting and Arabs, but Jews remember the Arab riots. Obviously, we all remember what affects us more. He plays on what we have in Judaism, and I think probably since the Crusades, but a kind of a sense of Jewish superiority and victimhood. And those of you who know kind of the works of Shalom Aleichem, or some of the Yiddish jokes know that plays on this, There's this sense of, on the one hand, we're superior people, but we're also victims. Ben-Gvir wants to encourage disloyal Arab citizens to leave. He wants to impose the death penalty for terrorists. He is in favor of using live fire against rioters. And he wants immunity from prosecution for IDF soldiers who are carrying out their jobs as he understands it. That means that a rogue soldier would not be prosecuted. Okay? I want to be personal again for a second. I know that during the Second Intifada, my kids were my daughter was in junior high and had just begun junior high. My son was in elementary school. And I remember the fear of, first of all, we didn't let them ride buses. Kids in Israel do ride buses at young ages. We didn't let them do a lot of things. And I remember the fear. I remember waking up in the morning and thinking, is everybody I know going to be okay tonight? Am I going to go to bed? Okay, tonight was a good day. I'm going to sleep. Nobody I know was hurt. Nobody I love was hurt. And I remember when something went off in Jerusalem, and there was a period that I didn't know where my kids were. the phone system crashes, and even when it doesn't crash, they cut it off to protect first responders, because it's easy to just set a cell phone somewhere in the scene, and then the first responders will get hit. That's happened. So the phone lines crash. And if any of you know Israelis, not having our cell phones is not, I mean, that's not acceptable. But joking aside, I was petrified. And I remember the feeling for more than a moment, to be honest, and I'm not proud of this, of I don't care what you do to the terrorists, the potential terrorists. I don't care about collective punishment. I don't care about anything. Keep my family safe. That's all I care about. I am reduced, when I think of myself with a complex identity as a mother, okay, as a mother, but as an academic. I was doing my doctorate at the time, journalist. I have other identities. And I was reduced to being a mother as my sole identity, caring about my children. I have umpteen years of training. I have agency. My husband and I have decent jobs. We own a home. We're not wealthy, but we're certainly fine. And we have agency, and we travel. And we're not threatened by globalization. We benefit from it. And so I could pull together a lot of years of training and a lot of experiences and say, this is a feeling. I'm not going to act on it. I know how to I know all sorts of Cartesian divisions. I know how to distinguish between thought and action, between feeling and thought. This isn't who I want to be. How long can you do that when you don't have agency? When you're holding on? When the threat is much more palpable? When globalization is closing in on you? These aren't theoretical questions. These are real questions. A large percentage of the people who were killed in the Second Intifada were people who didn't have the money to take taxis and drive their cars. They rode buses. They shopped in the markets, the open markets. Me, I didn't go to the open market during the entire Second Intifada. I admit it. We shopped in supermarkets, particularly ones that we liked the guards, that we thought were safe. And when we were more concerned, we had the stuff delivered. Not an option that everybody has. Privilege matters. Let's not forget that. What about the people who don't have privilege? And so did Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and his party play on all of that. I think another point we should look at is Israel as Orthodox Jewish and Israeli. There's a lot of crying that, we lost Israel, the Israelis lost to the Jews. And the Jews means the ultra-Orthodox, as if the center-left had given up on Judaism. Center-left does not support liberal Judaism in Israel, not largely. And if it does, it's as an individual right. We gave in to the ultra-Orthodox, and they get to define Judaism for us. Well, no, I've never agreed to that, and many of us, but I think we have to bring a political meaning to that, not just the political meaning of gaining the support that we are entitled to and the government allocations that we are entitled to as liberal and progressive, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, indigenous Israeli movements, but also as a collective identity for all of us. There's no reason that a left-wing Israeli who believes in full political and social partnership with Israel's Palestinian citizens shouldn't have a clear Jewish identity as well. And I think we learned that because many of these people voted as Jews, the people who voted for the right. They may not have liked the Judaism that Ben-Gvir represents, but it's Jewish. And I don't think we offered that. Okay. There's concern about the Arab vote. Without going into all the details, I think that one of the things we see is that 120,000 people voted for Balad, which is a non-integration Palestinian party. Okay, Ram and Tal got in. They are the parties that want to participate in the government. And as you know, in the previous government, there was a Palestinian member of the coalition and a Palestinian party in the coalition. And they're back in. And the previous government allocated $10.3 billion for funding over the next 5 years within Arab communities. It's a lot of money, but it takes time, and they're not feeling it yet. Not in terms of the violence in their community, the crime, the poverty, neglect in the social councils, the overt discrimination, the school levels. Yeah, $10.3 billion is supposed to change that, but that'll take a long time. And at the same time, so we're seeing a radicalization of Arab society in parallel to the radicalization of Israeli society. What concerns me? I'm concerned if we'll be able to bridge these divides. Despite what I said, over 10% of Israelis voted for an openly anti-Arab party with proudly homophobic representatives. Religious Zionism is made up of 3 parties. One is Ben Gvir, whom you see here. The other is Noam, which is a party that basically runs on a homophobic platform. And the party headed by Smotrich, which is just a kind of generalized, Bezalel Smotrich, which is a generalized anti-Arab, anti-democratic, anti-liberal, anti-things that most of us believe in party. And I'm not sure that we can bridge that. I genuinely am concerned. On the other hand, I know that, and in addition, I'm sorry, I know that Israel is turning, according to the people who will be in power, into a more nationalistic, chauvinistic, religious, and hateful society. What are we going to be able to do about that? They're going to have the education system. They're going to have all sorts of, the ministries are all going to these parties. I'm concerned about if we can bridge these divides. Will we, the center-left, be able to present a credible alternative that's attractive? And besides crying Gewalt, what can we say positively about our society that will attract all? I'm concerned about our legal system. One of the demands by Netanyahu's people, the people especially in religious Zionism, is to annul the breach of trust law. Now, there's a lot of criticism about the breach of trust law. It's vague, it's not well worded. However, it is the basis for fighting corruption. If that law is annulled, it becomes a get out of jail free card for Netanyahu. Because of course no judge, and we do not have a jury, but I don't think it would matter, no judge would continue a trial on breaking a law that no longer exists. That's a little not good. It's not going to happen. And if they pass this, if they annul the law, then it's a get out of jail free card for Netanyahu. There's a number of these kinds of provisions. There's something called the French law, which says that you cannot prosecute a prime minister who's currently in power and then go, deal with it afterwards. But that's not, it's basically also an invitation to corruption. There is a serious attack on the High Court and the judiciary being mounted by these parties. And it's very much part of the coalition agreement, including one of the rabbis who has said that the override law, which I will tell you about in a second, must be part of the coalition agreement. Okay? This stems from the idea that these parties have that the court is too Israeli. It's globalist, it's individualist, it supports the universal language of human rights and doesn't focus on Jewish particularity. And what they are going to do is pass an override law. What this means is that right now, we don't have a constitution. We do have a body of laws known as basic laws, which function as a guide and a quasi-institution, a constitution. They serve the Supreme Court, particularly when it acts as the High Court of Justice, which is kind of a British, don't forget, a lot of our courts stem from the British system from the time of the Mandate. They can serve the court to say, this violates the law that calls for human liberty and dignity, for instance. This violates, and protect the minority from the majority rule. However, these are basic laws. They're not enshrined as a constitution. And what the override clause would say is that if the Supreme Court knocks down a law or a practice based on anything, basically, but certainly based on the basic laws, or cites a basic law or any other provision, go back to the Knesset, pass a law by a simple majority that contradicts the principle on which the Supreme Court knocked down the provision, okay? This is two things. One is it's completely removing the right of the responsibility for judicial review from the Israeli courts, okay? That would be analogous as if the Supreme Court in the United States did not have the right to call something unconstitutional, would not have the right for judicial review according to the Constitution. And remember, we don't have a formal constitution. We have basic laws that could be now undermined by a simple majority. The other thing this is the tyranny of the majority. There will be no way to protect the rights of the minority. There will be no standard by which to judge that. Lest you think that this is simply people like Ben-Gvir, who, can walk around with his gun, toting, and be a little bit of a buffoon, a popular buffoon, but a buffoon. Somebody you know less about is somebody like Simcha Rotman, who's now in the Knesset, who's a member of the Israel Law and Liberty Center, which on its website says that it takes its inspiration from the Federalist Society in the United States, which some of you may know takes credit for judges such as Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. This is a way that the American Jewish community is supporting through organizations such as the Tikva Fund, not only morally, not only through education, but also through vast sums of money, a strongly conservative trend in Israeli society. What kind of I'm concerned about foreign policy. I'm concerned that for instance, the U.S. brokered a maritime demarcation deal about 2 weeks ago between Israel and Lebanon. And Netanyahu has said that he wants to review the law because it entailed compromise on Israel's part. Many people think it's a win-win situation without getting into the details. It did involve compromise. Israel's foreign policy under Netanyahu was very close to Poland, Hungary. The current government, the one that's going out, tried to pull it back to Western democracies. We don't know what Netanyahu will do. I remind you of Netanyahu's close relationship with Putin, for instance. And Israel's still on the wrong side, or at least not on the side of most Western democracies with regard to Ukraine. I'm worried about relations with the U.S. We don't know what's going to happen in your next election in 2024. But if a statement made on November 3rd by Ned Price, a spokesperson for the State Department, What makes the Washington-Jerusalem relationship so strong and has made it strong since Israel's independence to the present day is that this is a relationship that has always been based on our shared interests, and even more importantly, our shared values. Well, I wonder what values we're going to be talking about, because I'm concerned that Israel will become an autocratic-style regime, and our discourse will be reduced to the most shallow level, that it's about strength and power. David Hartman, the late David Hartman, made a very important, brilliant distinction once, and he talked about the Jews of Auschwitz and compared them to the Jews of Sinai. The Jews of Auschwitz are the Jews who believe in Jewish power, Jewish survival above all. And the Jews of Sinai are the Jews who remember that when we received the Torah, however you understand that statement in Sinai, we received above all a commandment. The most common commandment is a commandment of compassion in various iterations for others, for the stranger, for the vulnerable, for the weak. I'm concerned if that's the society. I'm concerned about what will happen to women. Right now, there are 9 women in the upcoming coalition. Last time I checked, we were 50% or 51 of the population. I'm concerned about rolling back rights for the Arab minority, women, LGBTQ citizens. And as I said, you can forget about the Kotel, at least for now. I know you have your own concerns. I know that despite some of the results last night, in America, there's a populist, nationalist, nativist movement here as well. And some of you might wonder, why support Israel? I think that for too long, it's been Israel right or wrong. And we called it very crudely, and I think offensively, checkbook Zionism, write a check and wave the Israeli flag. And it's important to note that the conservative movement today at the Rabbinical Assembly issued a statement calling on Netanyahu not to appoint Ben-Gvir as a minister in his government. I checked just before, as I was preparing here, there's no response from the Israeli government yet, or the Israeli impending government. To me, being pro-Israel means supporting Israel when it's threatened by external forces, when we're threatened by annihilation, when we're unjustly accused in the world of public opinion and discourse, but also when we ourselves violate the values of what many of us believe is a Jewish state, what our founding ideals are. And I hope that you will stand firm when those values are threatened, whether from within or without. As I said, I don't think it's over. And one thing I want you to know, and this is where I think you come in, is that there is a strong civil society in Israel. Jerusalem that you know of from the press, and I admit as part of the press, sometimes that's the picture we paint, is extremist religious fundamentalism and hatred. I live in Jerusalem, and yes, you can call it a bubble, but don't we all live in bubbles? The right lives in bubbles too, if 50% of the population voted against him. I live in Jerusalem that is thriving with creativity and theater and art and street fairs and liberal synagogues more than sometimes I wonder how we support them all. And just about everything that I feel many of us need for a fulfilling life, and excellent schools for our children that teach values. So what I'm going to call on you is to think about civil society and how you can support civil society in Israel. I'm going to ask you to engage in civil society, one, by informing yourselves of what's going on, by promoting debate here in America allowing these questions to come up. Americans have been very fearful of allowing the debate on Israel to come into within the community. And I'm saying, no, we have to. In a divided society, it was Elie Wiesel who said that in these kinds of situations, silence helps only one side, not the other. And whatever side you're on, go for it. Support. Yeah, financial support, but I'm talking about moral support. I'm talking about making the work by these. There are over 250 civil society organizations right now in Israel teaching democracy to our kids in schools, running joint programs between religious, even ultra-Orthodox, and non-Orthodox, between Arabs and Jews, teaching democracy, teaching liberal values, teaching gender, teaching tolerance and inclusivity. Know about these organizations. Help them make a place. Contribute your thinking to us. You're experiencing some of this too. Together, we can create a society that I think both in Israel and the American Jewish community can truly, truly benefit from. I'm going to end with something that has become very popular. These are civil society pictures that I just kind of thought you might enjoy. But I'm going to end with a song that's become very, very popular in Israel. It's not a new song, but it's become something that is being played a lot. My Facebook feed is playing it all the time, but of course we all know what Facebook feeds are, but it's coming up everywhere. And basically what I want to share with you is my feeling that history is cyclical, as I said. This may not be a good time, but it's the time we're living in. And we have as long as we're playing the game, we can change it. Israel's an experiment. We haven't even been around 100 years. That's really young for a country. I mean, we're barely adolescents, and we're certainly noisy enough to be adolescents. We're a country of refuge for Jews throughout the world, as we've seen now with Ukraine. Generations of Jews, including my family, dreamed of Israel or of a Jewish state. I don't feel for myself, and I certainly won't preach here, but I don't feel for myself the right to just throw that out because it's not going the way I want it to go, and it certainly isn't. So we're the country that speaks Hebrew. That's important to all of us as Jews, whether you speak Hebrew or not. One of the things that I always loved when my kids were little is that the Israeli form of dodgeball is called Chayei Sarah. The parasha of Chayei Sarah, of course, begins with Sarah dying, right? And that means it's called Chayei Sarah because the person who gets hit with the ball is out. And you know, I know it's a silly maybe example, but it shows you how deeply rooted we are in some of the texts and some of the ideas, even if we don't know it. So this is the song that I want to share with you, and it's how I want to end. And, okay, it's supposed to work. No, that's not it. No, I'm sorry. Here we go. Are we not having sound here? I'm not connected to sound? Oh. Oh, I didn't tell you that.
No, I didn't know you were doing sound.
I didn't.
No,
I didn't.
we can do it out of your speaker.
Okay. No, how do we do that? Sir. Oh.
Let's just try playing it out of your speaker.
I take back what I said about my cred.
Where's your speaker? You'll have to give me a translation because they can't see it. They can't see give the trans. It's one or the other.
Okay.
It's the sound of the words.
I shall not keep quiet because my land has changed her face. I will not give up on her. I'll remind her, and I will sing in her ears until she opens her eyes. I have no other country, even if my land is burning. Only a Hebrew word, my home. And thank you very much. Are there any questions or?
Thank you to Eetta for not just insights on the current Israel situation, but also it gave us a lot of insights on what's sadly a similar situation in the United States and our divided electorate and the rise of the right here and everywhere. First, if anyone on our live stream also has a question, you can put it into the chat and I can read it from there. So let's start. Does anybody out here
Yes, sir.
have a question? Wait, I'm going to bring the mic.
I'm a retired Reform rabbi, the first time I was in Israel was on the Israel Year course in 1959.
Oh, my.
So I've been going to Israel for a long time, and I remember those days. I remember when you didn't ride in a car; you rode on a Vespa instead. Israel was very, very different, and I support Israel, but I don't necessarily support Israeli governments, and that's the distinction that I make. I make that distinction in this country. I don't know if I have a question, but one of the times that I was in Israel was at a Central Conference of American Rabbis meeting at the Diplomat Hotel in 1974. And a friend of mine and I went to the wall for Shabbat Friday night, before Friday night services, and we saw Mayor Kahana there. And we invited him back to my room the next Shabbat afternoon, and about a half a dozen of us met with him. I'll never forget that meeting for about 3 hours. He was meeting with Reform rabbis. He knew who he was with. Excuse me. And I just remember one of his explanations for his philosophy was that all non-Jews are Nazis. And because of that, we all have to come to Israel. That was his philosophy. And it's exceedingly dangerous, and it's expressed in a willingness to export the Arabs. That message is something that I don't think most Americans get. I don't think most Americans have any idea of what Kahanist philosophy is, and that's something I think that we need to do. Something else also. Looking at my cell phone here. Could you hold this for a second? I'm thinking of the article in the paper yesterday by. What's his name? Brett Stevens.
In the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, the New York Times.
The New York Times now. He was with the Wall Street Journal.
Right, no, New York Times.
And also with a magazine that was, different from yours, let's put it that way. And he makes his argument is that Israel is not going to fascism. But at the same time that he says that, this is what he says. If I can find it again. that Israel is deeply divided. Let me find what he said. I'm sorry if I. Okay. Oh, here it is. Speaking about. Okay, let me find it first.
You mentioned that 49% of the popular vote went to parties that didn't make the threshold.
No. With the parties that did not make the threshold, that came very close to making the threshold, which is primarily Meretz and one Arab party that were very close. So if you think of them as part of the voting bloc, we're not talking about the kind of marginal crazies. That would make, you're right, that would make no sense. It's including the parties that were close, very close. Meretz was under by minimal percentage points.
Okay, but why don't some of those parties, if there are 40 of them, join together? So that...
Yeah, if you remember, I said they didn't even sign leftover agreements, what we call the votes. There's serious criticism primarily over the Labor and Meretz that did not combine. They certainly, Labor was afraid that it would pull from its votes, and that they would come out with, that together they would come out with less than if they ran separately. That was predicated on the idea, of course, that Meretz would get in, and it didn't. Why they didn't run together? Because the center, I mean, we can get into all sorts of analyses of why the center-left is always kind of more self-critical and more purist. And, there's an old saying that perfect is the enemy of good enough. And the intolerance for good enough. I mean, there's a lot of political ideologies involved, but yes, I think what we're going to be looking at now is I hope what we're going to be looking at is a complete rethinking within the Israeli center-left of what it means. I believe it'll stem from civil society, that's where it'll start.
Because I think you mentioned that the religious Zionists were made up of 3 groups that combined, seemingly.
Netanyahu brokered that, by the way, and it was Netanyahu who therefore gave especially Ben-Gvir legitimacy 3 weeks before the elections, or several weeks before. When asked if he would appoint Ben-Gvir as a minister, Netanyahu said, "Oh no, never." The evening of the elections, he said he's certainly qualified. The person who gave him legitimacy within the political world, within the political mainstream. And then he gets interviewed on TV, of course, and the day after the gun scene that I showed you, he was interviewed on a cooking show, true, on a right-wing television station, but still, it's a real station. He brokered that, and it certainly played out, because I don't think that separately any of them would have made it in. And we wouldn't be looking at what we're looking at. That's the magic 61. 61 forces you to do things that, I don't think Netanyahu, by the way, is very happy with this. I mean, I'm sure he's happy that he's got a coalition and that he's got a stable coalition. I don't think he's happy with some of the kinds of things that these people are going to try to pull. Netanyahu is a lot of things, but I don't believe he's homophobic or anti-woman or misogynist and things like that. I mean, I don't think he's going to be very happy when one of the things that United Toward Judaism wants to put is to demand that Israel outlawed conversion therapy for LGBTs. And they want to reinstate conversion therapy, have it paid for by the public health system, and that it can be performed legally by rabbis who have no psychological training. So I don't think, to be honest, without trying to minimize, I don't think he's terribly happy about all of this, but this is what he may be facing. And we're going to be looking at a dark time.
Rabbi, did you find the quote you wanted to?
I did, yeah. On the one hand, Stevens says that Israel is not moving in the direction of fascism. But on the other hand, he says the country needs a relevant, appealing, and politically potent left as a viable check on, listen to how he refers to Ben-Gvir's party, a populist, xenophobic, anti-secular impulses. If that isn't a description of fascism, then what is?
I
I mean, he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. That's what I'm basically saying.
obviously, but I think that it's also this idea of both the combination of Jewish supremacy and Jewish victimhood that's kind of in the back. We were the ultimate victims. How can we possibly be guilty of bad things? I kind of wish that the general human trend in all ways is that victims become super moral, super kind people. Unfortunately, that's not how we're wired. It just isn't true for everybody. And it's certainly not collectively true. How can you think of us as potential fascists? How can you use that word when we were the ultimate victims of every fascist movement that was ever around? Well, because victims sometimes become victimizers. And I don't know, to tell you the truth, I don't know to measure if we're becoming fascist or not. And I don't, like I said, I don't believe that history is over. I think Fukuyama was pretty wrong. But I do think that all it takes is to pass a lot of laws and to believe that majority rule is the sine qua non of democracy. Without protections for minorities, to live in a fascist, autocratic, pick your word, but a society that we don't want to have. And so without, I don't want to play a word game. As you said, in the end, I'm not sure that matters. You want to define it that way, fine, define it that way. You want to define it as autocratic rather. I'm concerned about what it means in terms of everyday life, and what it means in terms of the values that we uphold, the quality of our society, compassion, caring, care for the minorities. What are we teaching our children? What do our streets look like? Or how are we participating in the environment crisis? Those aren't things that fascist / autocratic / non-democratic, I don't know. I don't see Orban thinking about that too much, and certainly Bolsonaro wasn't. So without the wordplay, there are people on the ground. As I said, 250 organizations actively today involved in combating this. That's where I think our hope is. And in a redefinition of Judaism in the collective political sphere. Until now, I think the liberal movements have been very, very active in demanding our rights, which we're certainly entitled to, but I'm looking at something broader, including secularists who do not see themselves as Jews, but can draw from Jewish values as well as universal values. We have what to offer the world. And we have certainly what to offer Israeli society. In fact, that's what's unique about Israeli society. I think Judaism is inherently anti-fascist by so much of Jewish thinking. The examples, and not everything in Jewish history is perfect, and not everything in Jewish history we have to grab onto, but the ultra-Orthodox are an aberration. They're still fighting the Enlightenment, and the concept of Judaism, that everything new is evil, is not a Jewish concept. Well, it is since the Enlightenment, but they're not the only ones. And so I think that by supporting civil society and looking at the values, looking at the quality of life, celebrating the good things, and as I said, engaging in the debate here is, as well as there, is the protections that we need to build in. I don't know if you want to call Ben-Gvir fascist. I would, but you know, that's going to be, you pick your theoretical political scientist and I'll pick mine. We can have and we'll have a theoretical debate about words. I want to have a thought
I
of.
want to move us to a final question.
Sure.
Taking from a couple questions that I've received. You talked about Americans not abandoning Israel. What are specific things you suggest American Jews, and certainly progressive American Jews, actually do right now in response to a government? We've had to face our own responses with our American government, so we have some experience of what to do, but how should we do it for a country we're spiritually connected with, but are not citizens of?
I think that, first of all, you're not citizens of Israel, but you are members of the Jewish community and the world Jewish community. And if Israel is the Jewish state, then it's the state of all Jews. And citizenship is the right to vote. It's jointly held by Palestinians and by Palestinian Israelis and by Jewish Israelis. And yeah, you can't vote, but I definitely want to think that if we perceive ourselves as the Jewish state, then that means we're the state for everyone, for the Jews. What to do, as I mentioned, I think first of all, start supporting civil society. Civil society is very strong in Israel, but will start to feel the stress. It's hard to be an activist when you're consistently called a traitor. You're betraying your country by getting out there. There will be more violence on the streets. Moral support, financial support are crucial to maintaining an ember, as we say in Hebrew, that stays alive no matter how dark it gets and is always there. We will be ready with ready-made plans, with ready-made ideas of what to do when the pendulum turns again, and it will, I believe that. Come to Israel, don't abandon us, but not necessarily court the government and let Netanyahu know that you're not pleased. I think the statement by the conservative movement calling on, and in very specific terms, you know, this isn't just general worded, we're concerned. This is don't appoint Ben-Gvir. And when Ben-Gvir comes, whether he's security minister or whatever, internal security or whatever portfolio he gets, if he gets, you can boycott. You can say, he doesn't represent me. As an Israeli citizen who served in the army, and I know I'm speaking for many of my fellow Israelis, I know because I've checked, speaking for my husband who fought in 73 and 82, please speak up. No, just because you didn't fight in the army, this is not the sine qua non of what being Israeli is. I didn't fight in the army, so I don't have the right to speak up? That's all we are? No, we're a lot more than that. And so the answer to the question of what to do, be involved, bring the debate here. I don't know all the answers. Together, we think better. Our input, your input, great people, wonderful things happen. It was Margaret Mead who said, never doubt what a small committed group of people can do, the change they can make. In fact, it's the only thing that can change. And I just that's not an exact quote, but that's the gist of the quote. And I'll add something that I think that she missed, which is that we have to be organized. We're organized in Israel, we have civil society. You are organized here. Let's talk. Let's help each other. Financial support, sure, but moral support, political support. Make yourselves known. Letters to the editor. Argue with Bret Stephens. Argue with Tom Friedman, who was so negative. Why did he forget about people like us in his op-ed? We're there too. So that's my answer, please.
I want to give our deep thanks to Eetta for coming all this way from Israel to us.
Thank you, sir.
A reminder, we are trying to elevate some of our Israel programming at Temple. If you have any interest in helping make that happen, you should let Cantor Pincus know. She's taking in the names to create more Israel programming here at our synagogue. And we wish you great success on the rest of your journey as you
Thank
teach
you.
and educate. It's always
you.
great to have you here again.
Thank you, sir.
Have a great night. Erev Tov.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.